All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We have a very exciting panel for this plenary conversation at the Frontiers of Digital Development Forum. This is an extremely important and timely topic, and I'm so pleased that our speakers and so many of you can join us today for the second day of this forum. So, since February of this year, many of us have watched in horror as the Russian Federation has attacked Ukraine, causing billions of dollars of damage and forcing over 7 million individuals to flee the country and another 8 million to be internally displaced. The war has led to loss of life, loss of livelihood, damage to critical infrastructure, and unquantifiable hardship for the Ukrainian people. When the war started, I, like many others, thought that one of the first targets of Ukraine's critical infrastructure would be access to the internet and use of digital tools, especially given that for many years leading up to the invasion, the Russian government was launching cyber attacks against Ukraine. However, I think the entire international community has been amazed that not only do Ukrainians continue to have access to the internet, but the government continues to provide public services via digital tools. This is largely due to investments that Ukraine made prior to the war in internet connectivity and citizen services. Those investments show the value of a resilient digital ecosystem in cyberspace in the face of crisis, disaster, or war. In today's environment, digital technologies enable everything from transportation to energy to security. Notably, in 2019, President Zelensky created the Ministry of Digital Transformation to develop Ukraine into a digital state. One significant achievement was the launch of Diia, a mobile app allowing citizens to access their legal documents digitally, combined with a single portal of public services. The main goal is to make 100% of public services available online. Now there are over 200 registries in the platform and more are being built all the time. So today I'm joined by three panelists who can provide a unique perspective on Ukraine's internet infrastructure and digital services. First, I'm joined by George Dubinsky, the Deputy Minister of Digital Transformation of Ukraine, Tim McQuillian, an independent consultant focused on digital infrastructure and digital economy, and Troy Etulain, a digital development expert and the CEO of Etulain Consulting. So thank you all for joining us today, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I want to start with George. Can you share the current status of internet connectivity in the country, and as well as the government's ability to continue to offer citizen services digitally?
Thank you, Sabine. It's a difficult question. Because of aggression is still ongoing, it's difficult to count the losses right now, but we have preliminary, it's around 30% of our telecommunications infrastructure is hit by Russian aggressors. And we are working, how to support it, our fixed internet providers and our mobile internet providers, because of, to provide our people with access to the high-speed internet was one of the goals of our ministry, from the start of its start. And we had such ambitious goal to cover 95% of our territory with high-speed internet and to provide our people with access to at least 2 mobile providers. And right now, as we know, Russians, when they came, they cut optic fibers connection. They ruined our mobile towers, cell towers, and we have to replace this infrastructure urgently with something. Particularly, we are using Starlinks and generators to provide people at least with some internet connection.
Great. Well, I think you're joining us today, and we continue to get so much communication coming out of the country. So I think that in itself is a testament to the focus on critical digital infrastructure. When you look back at the last couple of years since 2019. Why was digitization such a priority for the government? Why was it? Why was the ministry created? Why was this the focus for the government? For the last few years. And what steps did you take to expand the access to all these digital services?
Great question. The state in smartphone, it was vision of our President Vladimir Zelensky from the start of his presidency. And actually, the ministry was established in September 2019 after his election. And so it was an attempt, and I believe successful attempt to cover, to jump over this digital gap. And the idea of the ministry, and we still keep up with that, we have an ambitious goal to build the most convenient state in the world from the point of view for receiving services. And we have a few principles, and by the way, one of them, you cannot receive service in paper if it does not exist in electronic form. And we started with, for this purpose, the Ministry of Digital Transformation created Diia, which is a single brand that combines a mobile application with access to citizens' digital documents, and a single portal of government services and services for the population and businesses that provided online. And we have, a combination of mobile application and online service you can get through your computer. And right now we have around 18.3 million of users of mobile applications and around 21.7 million Ukrainians who have access to the digital services through the website. And there you can get, 14 digital documents and 20 services through your mobile applications, and around 70 services you can get through your web access. And we have variety of different services, starting from COVID certificate in the applications. And by the way, we were first country in Europe which recognized that your driver license, and we were first country which equate your paper passport and your digital passport. And right now in this application, you can do a lot of things. It's your connection with government. You can get certificate of register entrepreneur, change the type of activity or stop it, for example, just literally in few clicks. You can get certificate of criminal records, you can file a lawsuit, you can change the place of registration, pay taxes, register car or other service related driver's documents, issue a number of licenses, permits, and get extracts from your registries, and you can do everything online. And so from this point of view, we believe that we are following our goal to make the life of our citizens better. So it was important for us to achieve this goal and to continue our digital transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the best things that we have learned about Diia is that even as individuals now continue to be internally displaced or externally displaced as refugees, they're still able to access all of those services via the platform. And that has been a real testament to just how powerful this tool can be, that even if you're fleeing, you have access to all these critical documents that you need.
Yeah, it's really very important for people who unfortunately they had to leave their houses. They had no time to pick up their documents on time, and the internally or externally displaced person, but they have access to their Diia application, and it means that they have access to their registers, to their e-documents. And we did tremendous job also with our colleagues, and we're thankful to them, our European colleagues particularly, to recognize these documents also, in other countries. And particularly, we are working very closely with our Polish colleagues, and since July of this year, Diia.pl, digital documents are recognized in their electronic application M-Obywatel. And it's for Ukrainians who were forced to leave to Poland due to the Russian invasion, and has become an official passport and full-fledged document with you can travel in EU countries. And also, in the nearest future, thanks to the cross-state sharing service, it will be possible for drivers to share their digital driver's licenses for vehicle registration certificates from Diia to Polish Obywatel application as well. And Diia is continuing to work even during the invasion. We are issuing probably 1 or 2 new applications inside Diia each week, each
Wow.
1 or 2 weeks, and a lot of services connected with the defense of our country.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing, really, truly. I want to turn to Tim right now, and I want to say, Tim, you helped USAID sort of look at Ukraine's digital ecosystem across the board, and specifically when you talk about Ukraine's digital infrastructure, how does that compare to other countries that you've worked in or looked at?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. So it's actually pretty well developed infrastructure. I mean, if you look at, for one thing, Ukraine's a huge country, right? It's the size of France. So to be able to cover that much territory is a challenge in and of itself. But Ukraine had a pretty well developed infrastructure. So in terms of international connections, they actually had connections to all 7 of their neighboring countries, which is important for obviously, internet connections with other countries and globally. So they also had a pretty good fiber optic backbone. They were still in the process of building out, still a lot of copper and things like that. But there was initiatives going on, as George I think alluded to, expanding broadband into the rural areas. So they were in the process of that, and there was pretty good coverage. As far as the market goes, for fixed broadband, is pretty fragmented market. There were, a few big players, but also a lot of sort of very small ones out in the regions, which, pose some issues, some challenges in terms of regulation and things like that. But turned out actually to be a plus, I think, in the situation that they're in now. Where there's not just one centrally one or 2 big ISPs where if you shut them down the whole network goes down. It's very distributed. In terms of mobile coverage, very good mobile coverage. Three mobile operators cover pretty much the entire country. 3G is pretty ubiquitous. Everybody pretty much could get 3G. 4G was a little slow rolling out, but just leading up to the invasion, it was actually building out quite fast. I think at least one of the operators, at least at that time, Kyivstar, had just built out almost, I think it was 95 or 98% coverage of the country. So that was good. In terms of I guess challenges, one was, again, as we alluded to, the digital divide. There's a lot of rural areas that still didn't have broadband internet, but there was an initiative, the Rural Broadband Subvention, which was actually actively building out to these rural areas. So they were definitely in the process of doing that. Cybersecurity was also a concern. Just like with normal, in a lot of countries, there's maybe some outdated software that wasn't being updated on a regular basis. There was some perhaps cyber hygiene skills out just in the regular population, right? Just like there is in all countries. That a lot of good cyber hygiene maybe wasn't being followed, and then within the network itself, there were some. With the equipment in the network that maybe pose some potential cybersecurity risks. But in general, they're very, very well developed infrastructure.
Great. And I just want to pull on one of the threads that you talked about, where you talked about a number of smaller ISPs that are in the market and how that has actually been a benefit in the current situation because you have multiple internet service providers. So you can't just shut down 1 or 2, right? You have to sort of go after the entire network. And so from your experience looking at the legal and regulatory framework, again, compared to other countries, what has sort of allowed these sort of multiple ISPs to play in this market, and why has that been such an advantage in the current situation?
Sure. So, from my understanding, and again, I don't know what's actually been done since the invasion started, but a lot of these small ISPs were still small because of a lot of legal, the legal atmosphere and a lack of regulation on them. So, I think the main thing though is around, I think you're talking about the governance of it. And so again, I'll kind of just take it up a little bit of one level, that I think a big thing around the governance was, and building out the infrastructure was starting the Ministry of Digital Transformation, putting it in one central body to undertake all these actions around digital. So they put, they basically put people in like, Mikhail Fedorov, who has a tech startup background. He came in, and it was something I actually noticed very early on when I started looking at the market, was he had this, he came in with a tech entrepreneurial approach, a lot of sort of agile approach, try things, fail fast, thing that he brought from that private sector. And I think he also brought a lot of, the ministry brought a lot of transparency to the process, when they have a lot of dashboards actually where they show the progress or lack of progress in things in some of the projects. There was a lot of private sector engagement. I mean, I think this whole thing was driven a lot by the economy as well. They looked at the infrastructure as a strategic asset, and Ukraine's got a big tech industry. They've had it for quite a while, and so to keep that growing, which it had been growing very quickly, they needed the infrastructure to support that. But one of the big things also was, they didn't treat, or they haven't treated IT sector as a sector itself. They've looked at it sort of as a cross-cutting way to build up the entire economy and to keep a lot of the value that they send out to other countries through outsourcing in the country. So again, also getting back to the governance, I guess, there was a decentralization process going on at the time, trying to push more responsibilities out down to the regional levels, and they actually built that into the digital transformation governance. So they had these roles called chief digital transformation officers, where there would be one in each ministry, and also down to the regional level. So they could focus all these efforts into sort of a single role and have these folks work together. So I don't know if that totally answered your question, but that's.
No, I think it just shows, again, for other countries, like what a great story this is. I mean, prior to the invasion, of how a country really said, we're really focused on building out our digital infrastructure. We're really focused on connecting all of our citizens, and not just connecting them, but actually offering them services. And what are all the elements, a standalone ministry, sort of connections to all the other ministries, sort of an agile approach to the development, and then how that can just transform a country in transform the way that not only that the country's connected, but also how individuals engage with those services. And actually now I want to turn it to Troy, because I know this is something that you've looked at in the past, and just like looking at Ukraine's digital transformation compared to so many other countries in their attempts to do digital transformation.
The bean seems to have frozen.
I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah. So yes, my question is how would you compare Ukraine's digital transformation to other countries that you looked at in their transformation process?
They've made really admirable strides. And I mean, if you look at the extent, the capabilities of Diia, and try to find an analogous digital platform put out by any government in the world, you're hard pressed to find something that's so comprehensive, that's growing so fast, that has such wide acceptance amongst the population. I think it is important to add a little bit more of a timeline on Ukraine's digital transformation. Before the Ministry of Digital Transformation was established, there were other really great things going on with digital transformation. For example, there's a very well-known government procurement platform called Prozoro, which really brought a lot of transparency and openness to the government procurement process. And it also did something really great, which allowed sort of companies to, take that sort of open data and then monetize it by adding services on top of open government data when the government was procuring a service, buying something. And Prozoro has been around since, I can't remember, 2014, I think. And then they introduced a subsidiary to Prozoro called Prozoro Sale, which is when the government wanted to auction off state property. And I actually worked with Prozoro Sale to put those transactions into a distributed ledger to make the transaction data permanent, essentially. And in addition to that, there's been a history of well-known corruption in Ukraine and attempts to, through USAID funded and other bilateral donor programs to stem the corruption. And earlier this year, I published an article on sort of expecting the end of the war and what kind of digital transformation investments we can make now. And one of the things I initially wrote in that article was about the ag sector. I used to advise the Minister of Infrastructure of Ukraine on open data, and we were at the time trying to tackle corruption in the state railroad agency, Ukrzaliznytsia. At the time, they sort of, either they fall under the Ministry of Infrastructure, but they were working in a very corrupt, not really respecting the authority of the ministry type of situation. And the rumor was that they were making $1 million a day in bribes because, farmers needing to get their grain from field to market, to a port, or to export it in some way, would always face this problem of Ukrzaliznytsia saying, "Oh, you need to move your grain, do we?" Well, we can't really find any train cars to move your grain, but if you wanted to sort of sweeten the deal, maybe we can find them and they'll be there tomorrow. So there were attempts to use technology to tackle this lack of transparency in Ukraine State Railroad Agency, and for example, putting GPSs on railroad cars, but they were torn off, and there were various attempts to use technology that didn't work. But so I was writing about this, but I was consulting with Ukrainian contacts to get up to speed on everything, and I think that I was really pleasantly surprised to hear that actually they've really transformed that sector and that the railroad agency. So now it's actually quite transparent and works efficiently. There are online tools and it's the only way to order cars to move for Ukrainian farmers to move their grain from one place to another. So overall, I think that if you compare to other countries, there's really been a many years of persistence, even prior to the creation of the ministry, to tackle some of the most challenging development problems, and that they've made a lot of progress. And this is including prior to the war and even prior to the creation of the ministry.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think showing that, it sits across all sectors and can address so many concerns. So George, I just want to turn back to you. So given the current state of the war, how can you comment on how Ukraine and the ministry continues to fight back, both to attacks to the critical infrastructure? And I want to pull up a statistic here that I read that as of last month, October, Ukrainian telecommunications workers had restored over 1,200 base stations in areas that have been bombed. So I've read that when there's bombings and these base stations are taken out, a group of folks go in pretty quickly to sort of restore the connections. So can you talk a little bit about that process and why, again, that's been such a priority? But also, I'm thinking about cyber attacks and how we've seen sort of an increased number, or at least reports of cyber attacks coming from Russia, and sort of how the ministry is sort of playing defensive to sort of these incoming attacks on the infrastructure.
So actually, let me start probably, from the last question, because of the cyber attacks. It was the issue we started to deal even before the full-scale invasion. And we saw, first of all, we are in this war for 8 years, and cyber war as well. And probably you remember the cyber attacks on our critical infrastructure in 2014, 2015. Obviously, all of you remember petty and non-petty attacks on the financial infrastructure, and not only Ukraine, suffered from them. So we were building our system of cybersecurity for 8 years, and we were focused on cyber defense. And we develop our cooperation with our partners, and particularly we had very successful dialogue with European Union and very successful dialogue with the United States, cybersecurity dialogue. And one of the outcomes, by the way, was a project financed by USAID to strengthen cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure. And, because of it as well, we were able to detect cyber threats. We were able to establish cooperation with our partners, with CISA of the Department of Homeland Security. We were able to develop relations with big tech companies which are working on cyber threats, particularly with Microsoft and with Google. We're working very closely with Microsoft Center for Cyber Threats. And we receive some information even in advance. So, and first attacks were big attack. I remember it was January 24, and in the months before the full-scale invasion, and in the middle of February, we detected the biggest DDoS attack in our history. Really, cost $1 million. And we were able to cope with that as well. And since that time, let's say since the start of this year, we registered around 1,370 cyber attacks. Not cyber incidents, but cyber attacks. And we, as you see, yes, we had some severe cyber attacks on our energy infrastructure, financial infrastructure, information infrastructure, and still the Russians are trying to hit them. But mostly, I have to say that we have no severe consequences. None of them were, so successful to get such a famous breach in our cyber security. But so, we were successful. I believe that we were successful from the point of view of cyber defense. Another part of this, I would say, we are talking right now about not only cyber, but digital resilience. And part of this digital resilience is the resilience of our telecommunication infrastructure. And yes, really, we were quite successful as the ministry in achieving our goals, and we have 97%. I wanted to add, we had 97% of territory covered by high-speed internet, and really, when Russia came, our people were already equipped. Even our rural areas, they had access to internet, and for last 2 years we connected 3,000 villages and around 6,000, social facilities to the high-speed internet under this internet subvention project mentioned before. And really, when Russian came and they interrupted all internet connections, they deprived our people to access to the information. It's very important from the point of view of keep people informed, because of Russia uses very, unfortunately, very wide disinformation campaigns in their practices inside the country and outside the country. And we need to keep our people involved. We need to them to connect with our government. We believe that it's kind of digital citizenship, part of our digital resilience, and we have to keep them informed about what's going on. For that, we have in Diia special application, Diia Radio and Diia TV, to give access to the people. And exactly. Immediately after liberalization of territory, our people who are able for internet, our providers, fixed internet providers, mobile internet providers, ISPs, so-called, they are coming and they are trying to restore this cell towers, to restore connection. And we use the existing telecommunication infrastructure. We're using Starlinks for that, and we plan to use mesh radio to extend this connection. Maybe we will equip some mobile point of internet access for people, because of right now with interruptions of electricity. It's unfortunately the problem for our people, but we are restoring this infrastructure. And surprisingly, I can say that this digital infrastructure shows itself as a more resilient than traditional infrastructure. So we are trying to keep it flexible. We are trying to duplicate some networks, mobile network, traditional mobile network, and for example, Starlinks. And in this case, we keep immediately after liberalization of territory, we providing them with connection, with communication with their relatives. It's very important for people who were occupied,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so interesting, because the same sort of agility, this like agile approach is actually coming to play even in the restoration of the networks, right? You're looking at using Starlink, using mesh networks, using other ways to keep people connected, which I think is it just shows, one, that, yeah, there's a lot more tools out there to keep for internet, for digital resiliency than, again, for traditional infrastructure, like you said, but also like, you're also making it a priority, right? Which I think is just because it's so important for people to be connected, and it's just like, it's critical infrastructure at this point, right? People need to be connected, and so you need to prioritize it. So I did want to ask, because you mentioned it, this issue of misinformation, disinformation, malinformation that's coming through. What are you're using Diia and those services to provide counterparts? What else are you doing to sort of combat the misinformation?
Oh, Sabine, what I have to say, that disinformation, misinformation is one of the dimensions of this war. Obviously, like kinetic war, cyber war, misinformation, disinformation is definitely, one of the severe weapon of Russians. And they're practicing this brainwashing inside the country, and they're trying to also, to extend it to our territory, and, to exaggerate one part of information, to hide another part of information, to show completely fake facts. And also, by the way, they are working not only on Ukraine, they are working in Europe, they are working in Africa. We detected their presence in China and Middle East and Latin America. And in this way, Russia tries to influence countries which are voting in the United Nations, to change their public opinion. And indirectly, and sometimes directly, they are also trying to interfere to EU and the US media market as well. And they are very actively using social media networks for that. But to prevent this effect, once again, we are dealing with Russian aggression not the first day. We established a few courses of so-called cyber hygiene, which means, we have cyber hygiene and information hygiene. So to teach people how to deal with threats in internet and media space, how to analyze information, how to detect fake news, how to check information, what kind of sources you can use for that, for information security, and as well as cyber security, starting from the simple, checklist, what to do and what not to do in the case of cyber attack. And ending, we even introduce some exams for our civil servants. They have to go through such courses. And in the frame of our ministry, we establish a few programs for this information and cyber hygiene. For we have kind of education Netflix, some short clips about what to do in different situations. And people are taking voluntarily, they taking courses in our Diia digital education portal. And we have a special project which is dedicated to you. It's mostly self-assessment. You can go through the test and understand that you're able to deal with cyber threat or not. And but I believe, getting back to the issue as such, we are deploying it in Ukraine as well, and using Diia application for that. And as I mentioned before, Diia is an effective means to keep citizens connected to the state. But I believe also, countering disinformation is a global issue. It's a part of digital resilience, not only for Ukraine, but for all the world. And I would say even, the private business is also interested to and has to be involved in that, because of in fact, they're involved, and the social media platforms, they're involved in this, and we in this battle, and we have to develop some rules, code of conduct or rules of law in this area, because of people are suffering from that. Because of it's not only the battle on the battlefield, it's a battle in your brain, in your mind, in your conscience. And so I believe we need also, to work with our like-minded allies, and we have to work on the response on that, global response.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree. So I just want to turn it over to Tim and then to Troy. What lessons can other countries learn about digital ecosystem resiliency from Ukraine? And, when we think forward, not only from man-made disasters, but also natural disasters, how can countries start to protect themselves going forward, so that their systems are more resilient? So I'll start with Tim, and then same question to Troy.
Sure. So, I'll just kind of go down to the basic level. Number one is, and I think it was sort of alluded to, at least during this conversation, is, it's teaching people how important communication is in general, and to make, telecommunications infrastructure a critical infrastructure and treat it as such, just like water, just like energy. Information is as important as those things are, and the internet is. So that's the first. And I guess, again, kind of keeping it at the basic level, that first of all, like, governments need to be informed, about their internet and digital infrastructure. They need to treat it as a strategic asset and be up to date on what their infrastructure even is. There's some countries that are still in the process of mapping out their fixed line infrastructure. So that, is just sort of a bare minimum, is to know what you have. And in the process of doing that, I'd say, work with the operators in the private sector. The companies that own these networks and that are deploying them, they're the best ones to know, and to keep it up to date. So it's not just sort of a one and done situation where you map out your infrastructure and you're done. There should be constant updates to it, that the regulators and the government need to be aware of, because that actually also helps if you're being transparent, kind of the way Troy alluded to, having sort of maybe a platform that the industry can use to know where all the infrastructure is, so that if they want to build out their own infrastructure and connect into someone else's network, they'll know how to do that. And by the same token, when the government has its own, whether it's digital infrastructure or other kind of infrastructure projects going on, it's good for the network operators to know that as well. So, there's some cost efficiencies and things like that going on. And then I guess finally, just sort of, be prepared if you have all those basic tools and information at hand. Have emergency plans in place. Whether it comes to backup power, or having rapid reaction teams going through scenarios, things like that. Just again, I think if it starts to be treated like it did critical infrastructure, I think a lot of those things naturally, if you start doing those same things for the telecom infrastructure, you'll be a lot more prepared.
Great. And then Troy, same question to you. What can other countries learn from the Ukraine experience to make their own digital ecosystems more resilient?
I think it's really important to think of the non-physical aspects of digital resilience. So if you compare how Russia and Ukraine have acted since the war started, right? Russia has blocked almost 4,000 sites. The obvious ones like Netflix, Facebook, less obvious ones like chess.com. Ukrainian soldiers are allowed to film in the field. Russian soldiers are not allowed to have cameras, smartphones, phones in general. They catch people with cell phones. They literally crucify them to trees. They nail people's cell phones to trees. But to the extent that if you think about how open flow of information is really kind of the goal of the infrastructure, right? The infrastructure is just an enabling factor for a healthy digital ecosystem of information. And to the extent that in Ukraine, you have, bloggers having emerged out of nowhere who now have, there's a pilot airline pilot who now has 500,000 followers, who's the source of so much up-to-date information. He's getting it from inside information. There are maps shared, there's so much transparency on the Ukrainian side that you need to realize that the medium is the message, right? Ukraine's digital information ecosystem is intact and healthy, and it's playing a critical role in winning the war, right? Because there are some questions I think that it raises, so if you think about the openness being a part of the message, that the country's not afraid about the free flow of information, that to me is hugely significant. The area that I alluded to that's a little bit blurry, I think, is that there's sort of a, with telecommunications, with the role of citizens in the war, there are some blurred lines, right? As of September, there are at least 23,000 Starlink antennas in Ukraine, a lot donated by Starlink, some paid for by USAID, but it's not clear to what extent those are being used for civilian internet connectivity and some are being used by the military, right? So this sort of initial thing of like, let's keep people connected to the internet is very much transformed into this really helps field operations of the Ukrainian military. So, it's both civilian and military at the same time. Not that that's the only technology that does that, but you see like Starlink antennas on the boat drones that are attacking boats in Sevastopol, and they're connecting people in villages. But also the government has an open appeal to people to say, well, here's a number to text if you see a drone fly over, and a kamikaze drone fly over your house. So they want to get an information sphere. So the government has very much enlisted the civilian population in that aspect of war fighting, intelligence gathering, which puts people in harm's way. But on the other, potentially, right? But the other aspect of it is that it's sort of like we are all a part of this, this kind of overall, we're all in it together to win this war, to kick, kick people out of the, kick the aggressor out of our country. The final thing I was going to say is that the information, the digital resilience, what the Ukraine has demonstrated is one that is very much not limited to the territorial boundaries of the country. There's a lot of participation in foreign participation in Ukraine's digital resilience. Like right in March, you saw reports of 300,000 volunteer civilian hackers to attack Russia or to keep Ukraine's digital space intact, right? So because of the openness and the communications on Ukrainian social media, by Ukrainians on social media, you see people participating in this conflict from outside. Luke Skywalker's donating 500 drones. Mark Hamill, the actor. You're able to see Ukraine winning because of the transparency of the information space, and that creates expectations for continued transparency of information as intermediated by digital, by online platforms and so on. So I think that more than the physical resilience, it's actually the non-physical aspects that are actually more important.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting because I know like so often, at least in countries where we work at USAID, there's a lot of, hesitancy from the part of the government to be super open, super transparent, to provide so much power into the hands of citizens when it comes to the internet. And we hear that all the time, how much can we really give to the citizens? Like how transparent, how open should we be? Do we sort of set ourselves up for potential issues? But this is a case where actually that openness has enabled so much power in the face of this aggression, and just saying yes, like we're open, we're happy to have people participate, we want you to participate, has really shaped so much of the conflict and the role of the citizen and the role of bringing other folks into this to help to support it as well. I have one more question, but I'm actually just going to go to the audience, and I really want to. I knew it was going to come up. This question about Starlink. So George, I'm going to hand it to you. There's a question. I know it's. I know we've seen so much about Musk in the news, and we've. But there is a question out here about how much of the connectivity infrastructure in Ukraine is dependent on Starlink, and is it sizable? And so, can you just expand, because it sort of seems like Starlink is coming in to sort of correct some of the damage that's been done. It's not part, but can you just share like what is the sort of status of Starlink?
Like I mentioned, I don't know what the division is between military use and civilian use for Starlink antennas, but I think that there's sort of like three genres of the connectivity situation, from what I can tell. And part of this view is based upon, I did work a little bit with the network planners from the Ministry of Communication on a connectivity exercise about a year and a half ago. So I'm familiar with their network challenges based upon population size. I think that in the west parts of the country that internet connectivity is pretty solid. There's a lot of, there's fiber, there's MNO infrastructure that is, if it's affected, it's been mainly affected by strikes on energy infrastructure. So if the power goes out, maybe you've lost internet connectivity, but once the power is back on, then you're okay. You can get it back. Keep in mind that your typical base station will have its own generators. They were there anyways since they were built, right? Just to keep mobile connectivity going. So if the city loses electricity, you typically don't lose mobile connectivity. Then I think more kind of in the frontline area where there's been an exchange of, the front line has moved back and forth since the conflict began. It's in those places, I think, where you're seeing more damage, explicit attacks to internet infrastructure, where it makes sense for civilians to provide civilians with, say, Starlink connectivity, enable connectivity. I've looked in, I think that one Starlink antenna can sort of provide broadband access to 20 individuals. So you need to think that if you're going to, you need to think about how you're going to redistribute the connectivity from that antenna to other people, like via mesh or just like maybe just a Wi-Fi router. So, and I think probably Wi-Fi is the most likely. So you actually have a very small footprint and limited to just like say 20 individuals per antenna. And then in the east, Russia has very much gone into the ISP offices where it could, and it physically or electronically say rerouted the traffic in the places that it's taken over since February 24th. And that stuff is being, all of the DNSs, everything is going to Russia now. So those people don't necessarily lack internet access. It's just, it's like they're in Russia now. So they don't have access to Starlinks at all. And one other I think important point is that, and I was at a talk about cybersecurity and a couple of weeks ago, and the U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor was talking about why more internet hasn't been hacked in Ukraine, and she hinted strongly that you have to consider that the hacking tools that are available externally to say take down a site or to mess with the flow of bits across the network are the same tools you might use to observe communications going on. So in many cases, Russia didn't intentionally take down or destroy some internet infrastructure in the east near the front line because it was a means of intelligence gathering, right? So it's not just like they wanted to shut it down as some sort of binary way. They don't have access. We can therefore attack better or something, but actually infrastructure has been left intact for intelligence gathering.
All right, so I'm going to then turn to George because I just wanted to also ask you the question about the Starlink. And then there's also a question here about Diia and are any protections being offered? What sort of protections do you have in place for Diia in terms of protecting that information that's all sort of centralized under this app? But I just want to see if you have any comments on the Starlink piece as well.
Okay. I mean, I will try to be, very brief. First of all, Troy, thank you for your comments. It's very wise. I would be happy to continue this discussion because of some words here, really, they are true. And we are aware that Russia is making second on this territory using the existing channels. And it's one of the reasons why we need another channel from the Black Sea, avoiding Russia at all. The second point, about Starlinks. Definitely, it's stupid to deny that Starlinks became a part of our national critical infrastructure, national telecommunication infrastructure. So officially, we received around, through the ministry, with support of the ministry, we received around 20,000 of Starlink kits. In general, considering that we also have volunteers, we have private funds, and they also brought some, I would say that it's around 23, 24,000 we have all over Ukraine. And definitely we need them on the eastern border of Ukraine. And the model of usage of them, believe me, they are much more than also three. Our people, we are very inventive and creative. Because of fighting with Russia, to fight with Russia, you have to be inventive and creative. You have no other choice to win. And so, yes, we are using mesh radio, we are using Wi-Fi extenders. The model of usage is different. You are not watching Netflix on this Starlink. You can call to your relatives. You can maybe transfer some important information. You can get access to your documents. The most necessary things. It's why the model is. It's completely different, and yeah, really, people are using even in some cases they use some cell towers which are disconnected from fiber optics, but they connected to Starlinks, and they gave them 4G around the cell tower to cover people with some internet. It was temporary for a few days, but they did that. And maybe you saw this picture when a guy with a Starlink kit, was climbing on the cell tower to somehow to fix it and to give people more access to internet. And about the security of Diia, really, in the current situation, it's very important. We, unfortunately, we omit the question of the very important question of digital resilience, as a question of data and registries. Security of data is an important component of digital resilience. And we were able to redistribute our critical register in the first days of the war after the Russian cruise missile hit our central database. And we redistributed in other countries as well. And why, the war is going and the government is working, because of all our registers are safe. And it's why we are talking about some, digital resilience beyond the national borders, because of we arrange digital migration and we use cloud vendors beyond Ukraine, out of Ukraine. We can reach digital resilience, but balancing with internal and external resources. The application was specifically, tested a few times. It received some prize as the most secure application. We even conducted twice, I believe, bug bounty on that. So we opened it for open testing for all hackers all over the world. Diia does not contain your documents as such. Diia is an instrument, is your, portal, is your door, is your key to the registries. And the registries, it's an instrument for identification and authorization. And it gives you access to the registers. And registries, they are our agencies. They are responsible for our agencies. But with Diia, you can get access and you can shape the document you need. You can receive this service, for example. It's why we believe that this architecture is very promising, and we are one of the lessons we learned that it's reliable, and we are ready to work with our partners and to propose them this Diia application and to build their application on the basis of Diia. So we have actually, two-in-one. We have Diia application and we have a special registry platform, which was constructed to make all registers interoperable. interoperable, between each other. They're compatible because of the single platform. So we have quite developed ecosystem for that. And once again, the Diia is an instrument to keep connection, to keep the citizen connected with the state and with the society. And we believe it's very important. And this instrument is tested and it already proves that it's safe enough and protected. Thank you.
Great. So I have one last question, which is for everybody in the group. So when the invasion is over, and we hope that will be soon, what additional investments will we need to make to rebuild Ukraine's digital infrastructure so it comes back even stronger and more resilient than before? I'll start with George. I'll start with Tim on this one. What additional investments do you think will have to be made, sort of, when this is all done?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe George is the best one to start on this one, but yeah, obviously there's physical damage that needs to be replaced. I don't have the statistics on what's been damaged and what hasn't, but obviously there's a lot of fiber infrastructure that's going to need to be replaced. As we're talking about mobile towers, base stations, things like that. So I would kind of end on that, and maybe George has some more specific wish list things that he thinks need to be done.
Yeah, and I'll hand it to George. I wanted to give him like a breather in between all these questions. No, George, tell me. I mean, when you look at what sort of infrastructure will need to be replaced at the end of all of this, what are your sort of thinking in the ministry?
So, Tim, thank you, for passing the floor. And definitely, we have to think about the digital rebuilding of Ukraine, the digital restoration, because after the victory, even during your fight right now, you have to think about the future. You have to think about something ahead of you. And for that, we established an initiative, Digital Freedom, together with our partners from big tech companies and other companies, and to build to use the most modern and advanced technologies, and to build the most transparent and convenient state, and to build some ecosystem which will be convenient for the state and for the government. We believe it's a very promising idea. It's a very promising concept as such. We have no time to explain it in details, but I have to mention it's also part of not only digital but resilience as such, because we want to use our IT potential, our staff, our people, and they are generating right now quite significant part of our GDP, of our income. And in the situation when your industry was heated, our metallurgy was heated, our big chemistry was heated also very heavily, even our agricultural sector was heated. The digital sector shows even the growth. And so it's also part of digital resilience, because of your digital resources, they are working hard, they are highly motivated, they are they experience and they are well educated, they're speaking English, and they are ready for cooperation. It's why I believe we created the conditions for our partners, the most convenient conditions, including DSCT. I have no time to explain, but the most convenient for our partnership and for long-term cooperation. So welcome to Ukraine, welcome to invest, welcome to cooperate.
All right, great. And Troy, you got the 30 seconds. What would you say if you had to do one thing or one or two things? What would you say?
I think the end of the war will not just be an opportunity to restore infrastructure in Ukraine, but it'll be an inflection point to advance its digital transformation. And there are things we can think about doing now. For example, just on a conceptually simple level, the coordination mechanism for reconstruction. There will be a lot of donors and funds coming in, and a lot of different genres of reconstruction that need to take place, of infrastructure, but also lives, right? And I think that Ministry of Digital Transformation is awesome for digital transformation, but probably it maybe is not the best locus for the coordination of reconstruction. Maybe that should fall under like a special agency under the Cabinet of Ministers. And I think that we should also think about the people who've been made vulnerable by this war, like any kind of, we need to protect the vulnerable who might be, say, seeking assistance or help or trying to find people to collaborate with online, to make sure that there's like not any kind of form of exploitation of the people seeking to rebuild their homes, their businesses, and their lives. Thanks.
Great. No, all right. So we are at the end of our panel. This has been such an interesting conversation, and I really want to thank the panelists for joining us today. I especially want to thank George for beaming in from Ukraine. We really do. We wish you the best, George. We hope that there's an end to all this atrocities soon. And you guys have just been such a great example of digital resiliency. And thank you so much to joining, and thank you so much to everyone for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Troy. Thank you, team.
Thank you, Ilgar.